Welcome back to our primetime recap of today's January 6th hearing. That was Trump lawyer John Eastman exhorting the Georgia legislature that it was their duty to appoint Trump electors, even though Trump lost Georgia. It was also former President Trump telling Georgia officials that he just needed 11,000 votes, fellas. Come on, give me a break. All right. Right now, we're concluding our recap of what happened at today's hearing. We've still got Adam Schiff going to be joining us in just a moment. He was the member of the investigation who led today's hearing. One of the people who we heard from and one of the witnesses from the investigation today was Jocelyn Benson, the Michigan Secretary of State. We're going to hear from her as well. But the final point that we're going to recap now was sort of mind-blowing to me, a mind-blowing amount of new information on the issue of fake electors. The hearing today revealed a lot of new information on the part of the plot where Trump tried to make Republican officials in states he lost nevertheless send in electors to the Electoral College for him as if he had won. I'll just nut up what I saw, at least, as the new information that we learned today from the hearing. First, we saw that from the hearing today that the White House counsel's office said explicitly, told people, including Trump's White House chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and his top lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, White House counsel's office explicitly told them that their fake elector scheme was not legal. Also, we learned that the Trump campaign lawyers all bailed on the scheme, made sure they themselves had nothing to do with it because they, too, believed it was illegal. We also learned that the Trump campaign lawyers apparently did not convey this fact down the line. And so Republicans who took part in this scheme at the state level, at least some of them, felt duped into doing it and now say, now that they realize Trump's lawyers knew it was illegal, boy, they wish they hadn't taken part. The committee also turned up evidence that some of the fake electors asked the Trump campaign to please cover their legal costs in case they were sued or arrested and charged with a crime for having participated in the scheme. We also learned today that the National Republican Party, the RNC, helped with this part of the scheme. The Republican Party chair, Ronna Romney McDaniel, testified that the Republican Party helped put the fake slates of electors together. They helped the Trump campaign in this illegal effort. Bizarrely, we also learned that the fake electors in Michigan had a plan to hide out overnight inside the Michigan state capitol so they'd be there in the morning and able to sign their forged certificates inside the state capitol, even if nobody wanted to let them in. Even more bizarrely, we learned that the Trump campaign had trouble physically getting the forged elector certificates to Washington in time for the fake certificates to potentially be used on January 6th. Nevertheless, apparently, or maybe because they were having trouble with it, I don't know. Apparently, Republican U.S. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin offered that he would hand courier the fake certificates to Vice President Pence on January 6th itself. Seriously, that was all today. The fake elector scheme was always bizarre and astonishing from the first moment we found out about it. But today, honestly, it just went bananas.
Some campaign lawyers became convinced that convening electors in states that Trump lost was no longer appropriate.
I just remember I either replied or called somebody saying, unless we have litigation pending that's like in these states, like, I don't think this is appropriate, or, you know, this isn't the right thing to do. I don't remember how I phrased it, but I got into a little bit of a back and forth, and I think it was with Ken Cheeseborough, where I said, all right, you know, you just get after it. Like, I'm out.
At that point, I had Josh Finley email Mr. Chesbrough politely to say, this is your task. You are responsible for the Electoral College issues moving forward. And this was my way of taking that responsibility to zero.
The committee learned the White House counsel's office also felt the plan was potentially illegal.
And so, to be clear, did you hear the White House counsel's office say that this plan to have alternate electors meet and cast votes for Donald Trump in states that he had lost was not legally sound?
Yes, sir.
And who was present for that meeting that you remember?
It was in our office. It was Mr. Meadows, Mr. Giuliani, and a few of Mr. Giuliani's associates.
The Select Committee interviewed several of the individual fake electors, as well as Trump campaign staff who helped organize the effort.
We were just, kind of useful idiots or rubes at that point. A strong part of me really feels that it's just kind of as the road continued and as it was failure, that got formulated as what do we have on the table? Let's just do it.
And now, after what we've told you today about the Select Committee's investigation, about the conclusion of the professional lawyers on the campaign staff, Justin Clark, Matt Morgan, and Josh Finley, about their unwillingness to participate in the convening of these electors, how does that contribute to your understanding of these issues?
I'm angry. Because I think in a sense, no one really cared if people were potentially putting themselves in jeopardy.
Would you have not wanted to participate in this any further as well?
I absolutely would not have. Had I known that the three main lawyers for the campaign that I'd spoken to in the past and were leading up were not on board. Yeah.
He said he was working with the president's campaign. He told me that the Michigan Republican electors were planning to meet in the Capitol and hide overnight so that they could fulfill the role of casting their vote per law in the Michigan chambers. And I told him in no uncertain terms that that was insane and inappropriate.
In one state, the fake electors even asked for a promise that the campaign would pay their legal fees if they got sued or charged with a crime. Text messages exchanged between Republican Party officials in Wisconsin show that on January 4th, the Trump campaign asked for someone to fly their fake electors' documents to Washington. A staffer for Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson texted a staffer for Vice President Pence just minutes before the beginning of the joint session. This staffer stated that Senator Johnson wished to hand-deliver to the vice president the fake electors' votes from Michigan and Wisconsin. The vice president's aide unambiguously instructed them not to deliver the fake votes to the vice president.
Do not give that to him. Do not, nope. Do not, stop. This is a... Now, wait, there's a little bit of an update, actually, on this part of the amazing story since the hearing. On that last point, that Republican U.S. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin offered to hand courier to the vice president on January 6th the forged certificates for fake Trump electors. I mean, that was some new news today. But after that was revealed at the hearing, Senator Ron Johnson made very clear to reporters that he does not want to talk about it, to the point where he will fake being on the phone to avoid answering their questions about it.
How much did you know about what your chief of staff was doing with the alternate slates of electors? No, you're not. I can see your phone. I can see your screen.
Can you explain what your chief of staff was doing?
Does your chief of staff still work for you, Senator?
Can you explain what happened there? Why was your chief of staff even offering this to the vice president?
That's a complete non-story. We issued a statement, and it's a non-story. I don't know what you're even concerned about.
Well, they said that your chief of staff was saying that you you wanted to provide alternate electors in Michigan and Wisconsin to Vice President Mike Pence.
This was a staff-to-staff exchange, and I was, basically unaware of it, and the chief of staff contacted the vice president's staff, said, "Do you want this?" They said no, and we didn't deliver it, and that's the end of the story.
But why was he even asking for that?
Because somebody delivered this to our office and asked to deliver that to vice president.
Did you support his efforts to try to get those slates to the vice president?
No, I had no knowledge of this.
Who's the person?
I had no involvement in an alternate slate of electors. I had no idea this thing would be delivered to us. Got delivered staff to staff. My chief of staff did the right thing, contacted the vice president's staff. They said didn't want it, so we didn't deliver it.
Who's the person?
Again, that's the end of the story.
A staff-to-staff contact. Yeah, to be clear, it was his chief of staff asking for Senator Ron Johnson to be allowed to have direct contact with the vice president so he could hand convey these forged documents. I had no knowledge of this. You know, I was in the airport. A guy came up to me. He handed me this bag. It was ticking, and it had fertilizer coming out of it. I don't know who he is. I don't know what it was. He asked me to bring it on the plane. I just brought it on the plane. Yeah. I don't know what's in it. It was a staff-to-staff thing.
Somebody can see your phone.
Like, how bad is the fake electors plot? It's so bad that Ron Johnson pretended to be on the phone. I mean, this is also pretty telling in terms of how concerned these guys actually are about potential complicity in criminal acts.
Still with me here in the studio are my colleagues, Chris Hayes, Joy Reid, Nicole Wallace. We are joined now by Ari Melber, MSNBC chief legal correspondent, the host of The Beat. Ari, when a senator pretends to be on a phone call and he isn't, as Nicole pointed out, that usually indicates that he's a little bit concerned about what he's being asking about. Calling it a non-story doesn't overshadow his very obvious efforts to avoid talking about it, which makes it seem like a very big story. Is there, now that we know that the U.S. Department of Justice is investigating the fake electors thing, though, is somebody like Ron Johnson right to worry about being implicated with this plot?
Yes. I mean, it is bizarre and baroque, but also important. I think you put your finger exactly on it. The facts matter. The evidence is breaking through, and not only to the public that's watching these, but to the people at DOJ that are monitoring them. So the usual duck and lie defense is giving way to much more careful denials. The idea that on the certification day of this election, with everything that everyone had lived through up until that point, Mr. Johnson's office was doubling as a kind of a homemade postal service is absurd. Oh, yeah, that's what we do. We process mail for the vice president and hand it to him before the Senate. I hate to do this, but to paraphrase Biggie Smalls,
Thank you.
Don't be mad, UPS is hiring. It's like, you don't work at UPS, you're not the mailbag for the vice president. And by the way, again, I know I'm saying something very obvious, but to the extent that the Trump view and or argument needed an airing, he is the number 2 official in the Trump administration. Yeah. He's a member of the losing campaign. He was familiar with all that. So to circle back to end on your question, Rachel, the legal problem is you can lie on the street. You can lie on TV. You cannot lie to the government. Right. You can lie in front of the courthouse, but when you walk inside it, it's perjury. You can lie in front of the Congress, but when you walk inside and submit fraudulent documents, even if you are in the government, and sometimes especially because it could be a second charge, you're in a different turf.
And the thing that came through today in that montage you played and has come through the hearings, and I found very illuminating, is the awareness contemporaneously of legal exposure.
Yes. Yeah.
The Sussman saying, you go to John Eastman, you hire a criminal lawyer, that's the best advice you're going to get. Matt Morgan saying, I took it to zero. There's the awareness, but there's also the sort of spectrum in this broad ethical drama between the villains of the story, the Donald Trumps and the Rudy Giulianis, the heroes of the story, the Shea Mosses and Rusty Bowers, and then this huge swath in between, like the Matt Morgans, the campaign attorney we saw there, who didn't blow the whistle, who didn't say don't do this, who didn't say this is illegal, this is outrageous, who didn't, like Rusty Bowers, say I took an oath, I believe in this country, I believe in democracy, I believe in the rule of law, these things are precious to me, they are sacred to me. He didn't say any of that. He said I took it to zero and I let someone else try to pull off the criminal scheme to undo American democracy the first time in the 240-year history of this country. Congratulations, Matt Morgan, you CYA lawyer who managed to put that off on someone else's plate.
This is what scares me, because I don't see in this collection of people, I think it is smart that it's Republicans that are saying all of this, because it does take away the idea this is some partisan witch hunt about Trump. But it worries me because the line they were willing to bend, how far most of them were willing to go, was right up to the point of criminality. And they went, you know what, that's too much crime for me. You're too close to, where I could go to jail. But they were willing to go really far, which really worries me about future elections.
Were willing to hide in the Michigan State Capitol overnight so that they wouldn't be discovered and thrown out, and instead they could sneak in to doing their fake elector certificate before the real electors got there, and then maybe they'd be counted or something.
But I think, again, if you take it all as a piece, the point today, I think there were many points, but substantively it all came back to Trump.
Yes.
Trump was on the phone with the witnesses. Yes. Trump was directing his campaign to do this. We don't know yet if Trump wanted Johnson to be the cutout. I mean, he's like a freaking cutout to overthrow the election. I mean, I also think that the crumbs that have been dropped about Republican accomplices are irresistible. I think a lot of people understood Liz Cheney's final, whack at the end about doing your duty and ignoring the politics to be about getting Cipollone's testimony. I think she's also foreshadowing a lot of evidence they have that will make some Republicans perhaps want to tell their side of the story.
Just to add briefly, some of the absurdity can mask how close it was.
Yes.
Yeah. In a different world, people say, oh, they needed 3 states. Yeah. That's not what they thought. They thought if they waved those papers around and Pence took them, that they could delay to that day's certification.
Once you got one, there'd be so much chaos they could freeze it out of the chaos.
Eastman said he thought they had Florida. He said Florida legislatures were going to do it. I have a quick question for you, Ari, though. We also learned today.
Adam Schiff is standing by.
Never mind. I'll ask Ari. No, really quickly. Today we learned that Eastman might be the fall guy, right? That there's this Rolling Stone reporting from Aswin Suba saying that he's going to be the fall guy. They're throwing him under the bus, and I just wonder how that plays out. If he goes under the bus, what can he say?
Only works if one person getting prosecuted relieves the pressure on other people, and in this case,
couldn't he flip? Like, is he useful?
Eastman was worried about being the fall guy while Trump was still president, which is why he wanted a pardon. But if that pardon had ever been issued, it would have to describe Eastman's coup crimes for Trump. So Trump didn't want his lawyers to write that up.
In just a moment, we are going to talk to the man who led today's hearing. Congressman Adam Schiff has had a very big day. He's going to join us live right after this. Stay with us.
If the most powerful person in the world can bring the full weight of the presidency down on an ordinary citizen who is merely doing her job with a lie as big and heavy as a mountain, who among us is safe? None of us is. None of us. So Mr. Giuliani was claiming in the call that there were hundreds of thousands of undocumented people and thousands of dead people who had purportedly voted in the election?
Yes.
And you asked him for evidence of that?
I did.
And did you ever receive from him that evidence either during the call, after the call, or to this day?
Never.
Joining us now is California Congressman Adam Schiff of California. He is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. He led today's hearing of the January 6th investigation. Sir, I know this has been a big day. Thank you very much for taking time to be with us here tonight.
Good to be with you.
It is my estimation, having very closely watched today's hearing, that there were 4 main points that you brought forward. The first, and I think the most prominent, the most important of those, is that you explained how President Trump personally took part in cajoling and trying to persuade people to overturn election results in the states. He then personally took part in escalating from that to new tactics that would bring threats of violence and intimidation against those same targets. And we saw that, I think, in stark detail today. Is that the main point that you and your co-investigators wanted to convey today?
Yes, really just how premeditated it all was. How it started with a big lie that the president was told over and over and over again by his attorney general, a deputy, by his U.S. attorney in Georgia, by others, was a big lie, but that didn't matter. He used that big lie as a bludgeon to try to get these state legislators and elections officials to bend to his will to overturn the election, but he ran into resistance by courageous public servants who said, no, I'm not going to violate my oath. You may be the president, you may be the head of my party, but there's something more important to me, and that's my oath, and that's my faith. And I'm glad the public got to see these heroic people.
Congressman, it's Nicole Wallace. Violence and it's Donald Trump's proximity to it, whether it's with Mike Pence or with the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, has been a constant theme, and the committee has gone farther than anyone else ever has to putting him not just adjacent to the violence, but cheering for the violence, indifferent to the consequences of the violence. Does this story deepen? I mean, do you have evidence that puts Donald Trump in the command and control position over the violence meted out by the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and the other insurrectionist groups?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of our committee presentations, but, I think that one of the hearings where we explore what the president was doing, what he was saying, and what he was thinking while the violence goes on. It goes to this very point. It goes to the point of dereliction of duty. It goes to the point that he incited this violence. He incited this hatred. He riled up this base. And then what did he do while it was happening? He sat back and watched it all play out. To see today the human consequences of that, just a small part of it, these election workers in Atlanta who were just going about their job, who had no idea they were about to be hit with a club, this false claim, the likening of what they did to drug deals. I mean, it was just disgusting. And you see how people's lives were turned upside down, and ultimately how lives were lost on January 6th.
Hi, Congressman Ari here. You have this evidence of all these different people submitting false electors, including potentially to the government. Do you view this as something where one or more people have broken the law through that act alone?
Well, I share the view of Judge Carter in California that this plot to overturn the election, which had many facets, likely violated multiple federal laws and likely implicated the President of the United States. Whether one specific aspect or another violated a particular statute, I will have to leave to the Department of Justice, but I certainly believe there's more than enough evidence for them to investigate each of the crimes that Judge Carter set out. And I think the more evidence that we presented just strengthens the case for a federal investigation.
Congressman, I'm just going to jump in real quick here with a follow on Ari's question. I just wanted to ask you about the response from Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin today after this his connection to this part of the plot was aired today in the hearing. Senator Johnson said today that he was aware that his office had received the forged certificates, these fake slates of electors, but he says he doesn't know who delivered them. That struck us all here on the panel as odd, because if you got something from somebody you don't know who, the first instinct wouldn't be that you volunteer to hand deliver it to the vice president on January 6th. But that's what he says. He says he doesn't even know where he got them from. He was just a courier. Does that jibe with what you and the committee understand about Senator Johnson's involvement?
Well, I can't go into, what the committee's evidence or understanding is. I watched that same clip with a lot of interest today as Senator Johnson essentially said that he knew that something had arrived in the office. His chief of staff was being asked to deliver it to, or being asked to help convey it to the vice president. This is January 6th we're talking about, and the idea that he wouldn't know what it was or anything about it, I think begs a lot of questions.
Congressman, this is Joy Reid. I actually have a question about a senator as well, as Rachel did. But it's about kind of the dog that didn't hunt today. As I was watching the hearings today, I kept waiting to hear one name that I didn't, and that is Senator Lindsey Graham, who we do know from the reporting also put pressure on Brad Raffensperger and others in the state of Georgia to hand Donald Trump the votes, flip the votes that he needed in order to win that election. Can you talk a little bit about your process, about who was included and who was not included? And will we hear more about Senator Graham's involvement in this pressure campaign on particularly the state of Georgia?
Well, in terms of the process, as you might imagine, there's a volume of evidence, a mountain of evidence to try to communicate through each of these hearings, which, are only lasting between 2 and 3 hours. And so we have to kind of ruthlessly say what's most important to convey to the public. And that means a lot hits the cutting room floor. Now, ultimately, we intend to open up and release our files and let the public know the much bigger volume of what we have obtained. I can't tell you exactly when that's going to happen, but we do intend to share a lot that we couldn't cover in these hearings. But yes, some very difficult decisions are made with each of these hearings. What is most important, knowing that we can't convey it all or even more than a small fraction.
Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat of California, member of the January 6th investigation, who led today's hearing. Sir, I hope it's not weird for me to tell you that part of our job of recapping the hearing was, I think, made easier tonight by the fact that today was so cogent and so well organized. And we know that in large part that was your doing along with your staff and your fellow investigators. But thank you for your service today in presenting this so clearly. And thanks for joining us to help us understand it tonight.
Well, thank you. And I'm just so glad the country got to see some of these heroic public servants.
Thank you, sir.
That wasn't weird. That was nice.
Yeah, it's just weird to be nice to people on TV. You're like not supposed to, you know what I mean? You're supposed to pretend
I think
like,
when you're in the job, though, of editing and cutting, and it's made that easy, I think that's a nice thing to convey.
Well, it is interesting because we have seen the committee change up its schedule, right? And move stuff around and take some things off the schedule and put some things back on and change start times and everything. So we know that they are, and in fact, Zoe Lofgren has been open about the fact that this is really hard and we need to take some of the burden off the staff in terms of getting all the tape cut right and getting it all organized. And sometimes it goes more smoothly than others. Today's hearing was perfectly choreographed, perfectly organized. It made a bunch of points. Summing it all up, there were like 25 different pieces of news that they broke today, but they did it in such a way that it was well organized and seemed simple.
It was incredibly well done. And I think, we also have from a craft perspective, like this is what we all do for a living. Like literally this is what we do for a living. And so I have been really astounded by how well they've done that piece of it. The other thing is you just keep thinking of like, what would it be like if Jim Jordan or whatever, like Jim Bet, whoever was like, it just is an entirely different thing that is being done.
It's a presentation of information.
It's a presentation
of information. It's also incredibly bipartisan.
Yes.
Chairman Benny Thompson is so generous. He shares that role. He turns it over to Liz Cheney at the beginning and the end. The bipartisan imprimatur is so firmly on it.
And the leader of the next hearing will be the other Republican member of the committee, Adam Kinzinger, who's going to lead on Thursday when they start talking about the efforts to basically decapitate DOJ and turn the Justice Department into part of this plot. All right, we've got another guest who's standing by to join us. Our next guest tonight told the January 6th investigation about being on the receiving end of threats from armed protesters after she crossed President Trump in this plot.